The Anderson family lived in the town of Estes Park, Colorado, surrounded by the beauty of nature and wildlife. Every summer, they made it a tradition to travel to different national parks and explore wild habitats around the world. This year, they chose to spend a month in Kenya's famous Masai Mara Reserve. David Anderson, his wife Rachel, and their 10-year-old son Max had been preparing for this trip for months. Upon arrival, they were warmly welcomed by local rangers, who gave them a short briefing about the area's wildlife. The family was assigned a cozy wooden lodge right on the edge of the savannah, equipped with modern comforts yet surrounded by untouched nature. During the first few days, they explored nearby walking trails, took countless photographs, and learned fascinating facts about the animals from the rangers. But on the third morning, everything changed when they saw a leopard sitting silently in front of their lodge, with tears glistening in its eyes. Rachel froze in the doorway. Leopards weren't supposed to be here, not this close to human homes, and certainly not looking like this. The animal's golden coat was smeared with dust, its breathing uneven, its eyes locked on hers, not with the cold stare of a predator, but with something else, something she couldn't explain. David instinctively pulled Max behind him, but the leopard didn't move. It simply sat there, tail curled tight against its body, emitting a low, almost pleading sound. Rachel's heart pounded. She had seen leopards before, from a safe distance, through binoculars, guided by professionals. But this was different. This felt personal. From across the camp, one of the local rangers, Joseph, spotted the scene and ran toward them. His boots kicked up clouds of dust as he shouted, "Stay inside! Don't approach it!" But as he got closer, his voice dropped. His eyes widened, scanning the leopard's posture, its trembling legs. "It's not here to attack," Joseph said quietly. "It's here for help." David looked at him in disbelief. "Help? From us?" The ranger crouched low, speaking in calm Swahili to the animal. The leopard blinked slowly, then shifted to reveal something hidden in the grass. A glint of metal, tangled in the fur of its back leg. A snare, tight, cutting into the flesh. Rachel felt her stomach twist. It must have wandered into a poacher's trap, and somehow it had come here, to people, instead of running away. Joseph stood, his expression dark. "If we don't act now, it won't survive the night." Joseph's words hung heavy in the warm evening air. The leopard's breathing was shallow now, its flanks rising and falling too quickly. The golden light of the setting sun caught the faint tremor in its muscles. Rachel's instincts told her to back away, but something in the animal's gaze rooted her to the spot. This wasn't the wild, untouchable predator she'd read about in wildlife magazines. This was a creature on the edge, holding on by a thread. Joseph grabbed his radio, barking for a tranquilizer kit and bolt cutters. "No sudden movements," he whispered. "If it panics, the snare will cut deeper." David, still holding Max close, whispered back, "What if it lashes out?" Joseph didn't look away from the leopard. "It won't. Not if it came to us like this." A faint whimper, almost too soft to be real, escaped the leopard's throat. Rachel felt her chest tighten. She glanced at Joseph, who gave the slightest nod. They were seeing the same thing, not aggression, but desperation. Two other rangers sprinted into view, one carrying a long metal pole tipped with a loop, the other with a small medical bag. The leopard didn't move as they approached, its amber eyes never leaving Rachel's face. It was as if it had chosen her, singled her out from the rest. The first dart struck cleanly in the leopard's shoulder. It flinched but didn't fight. Within moments, its body slackened, and Joseph knelt beside it, pulling the metal snare free from its leg. The wound was ugly, deep, red, and raw, but treatable. Rachel crouched next to him, the adrenaline in her veins making her hands shake. "How did it know?" she murmured. "How did it know to come here?" Joseph didn't answer right away. He just kept working, his hands steady. Finally, he glanced up. Sometimes they can sense when they've run out of places to run, and sometimes, he looked at Rachel, they can sense who will listen. As they worked, the leopard's breathing steadied, the tense lines of pain in its body easing. But none of them, not even Joseph, could have predicted what would happen when it woke up. It was just past midnight when the leopard stirred. The rangers had moved it to a quiet patch near the tree line, far from the lodge but still under their watch. Rachel, unable to sleep, found herself standing at the edge of the clearing, the moonlight washing everything in silver. The leopard blinked slowly, its amber eyes catching the light. It didn't snarl or growl. Instead, it pushed itself unsteadily to its feet and looked directly at her. Joseph stepped forward cautiously. "It should run now," he whispered, "back into the reserve, back to its territory." But the leopard didn't move toward the trees. It took a single step toward Rachel, then another. Her heart pounded. She could feel every nerve in her body screaming to step back, yet she stayed rooted. The leopard stopped just a few feet away and lowered its head. Not in submission, but in something else. Something almost like gratitude. And then from the shadows beyond the clearing came a sound that froze everyone in place. A soft, high-pitched cry. Two small shapes emerged from the darkness. Cubs. The rangers exchanged stunned looks. Joseph's voice was barely a whisper. "She's a mother." Rachel's breath caught. The snare, the injury. It all made sense now. She hadn't come for herself. She'd come because she couldn't care for them while trapped and in pain. The leopard glanced back at her cubs, then back at Rachel. It was the briefest moment, but it was clear. Rachel felt it as surely as if the leopard had spoken. "You didn't just save me. You saved them." And without another sound, the mother turned, her cubs trotting at her heels, disappearing into the silver-lit grasslands. Joseph let out a long breath. "In all my years here," he said softly, "I've never seen one ask for help." Rachel stared into the darkness where the leopard had vanished, her pulse still racing, knowing she'd just witnessed something few humans ever would. For a long moment, no one spoke. The clearing was silent except for the distant hum of insects and the faint rustle of grass in the wind. Rachel could still feel the weight of the leopard's gaze on her, even though the animal was gone. Joseph finally broke the quiet. "She'll remember," he said. "They always do." Rachel glanced at him. "Do you mean she'll come back?" The ranger shrugged slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe she just needed to show you that you were part of their survival now." Over the next few days, the Anderson family stayed on in the reserve. They went on guided drives, saw elephants bathe in the river, watched giraffes stretch into the canopy. But Rachel's thoughts kept returning to the night in the clearing, to the look in the leopard's eyes, to the cubs following close behind her into the darkness. On their last evening, just as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Rachel stepped out onto the small porch of their lodge. The air was still, the kind of stillness that makes every sound sharper. And then she heard it, a low, familiar rumble, the deep-chested call of a leopard. Her breath caught. Slowly, she turned her head toward the tree line. There, half hidden in shadow, stood the same leopard. No limp now, strong, her golden coat gleaming in the last light of day. And just for a heartbeat, the two of them locked eyes again. Rachel felt no fear, only a quiet, inexplicable connection. The leopard's head dipped once, almost like a nod, before she turned and melted back into the wild. Rachel stood there long after she was gone, her hands trembling, her heart full. She didn't know if she'd ever see her again, but she knew, in some way, the leopard had said goodbye. The night settled in quickly after that, the African sky revealing a blanket of stars so bright it felt unreal. Yet Rachel barely noticed them. Her mind was still fixed on those amber eyes in the fading light, and the unspoken message they carried. Later, as the family packed for their departure the next morning, Joseph stopped by to say goodbye. He stood in the doorway for a moment, studying Rachel's expression. "You saw her again, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Rachel nodded. "Just for a second. She looked different, stronger, like she wanted me to know." Joseph smiled faintly. "You gave her back her strength, and she gave you something too." Rachel tilted her head. "What's that?" His answer was simple. A place in her story. That night, Rachel barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the leopard walking into the darkness, her cubs trotting behind her. She wondered if they would grow up knowing, somehow, that a human had stood between them and death. The next morning, the Andersons loaded their bags into the Jeep that would take them out of the reserve. Just as the engine started, Rachel glanced one last time toward the distant tree line. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a sleek, golden figure slipping through the grass. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the whisper of the wind. Rachel smiled to herself. Whether it was real or just her mind playing tricks didn't matter. Some bonds didn't need to be seen to be felt. As the Jeep rolled forward, dust curling up from the tires, Rachel kept her eyes on that horizon until it disappeared behind the bend. She felt an ache she couldn't quite name. Not sadness, not loss, but the weight of having been part of something rare and untamed. For the rest of the drive, the family chatted about their favorite moments from the trip. The thundering herds of wildebeest, the sunrise over the Mara River, the giraffes silhouetted against the dusk. Rachel smiled and nodded, but her thoughts stayed elsewhere. Back home in Colorado weeks later, she still caught herself looking toward the edges of forests, scanning the tree lines during hikes, half expecting to see a golden shape watching from the shadows. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind rattled the aspens outside their cabin, she would close her eyes and swear she could hear that low, throaty rumble again, not threatening, but alive with recognition. She never told anyone about those moments, because deep down, she knew they belonged to her and the leopard alone. And in the quietest hours, she hoped the wildcat still roamed free under African skies, strong, whole, and perhaps in some small way, remembering the human who had once stood at her side. Months later, a package arrived at the Andersons' doorstep. Inside was a simple envelope with the logo of the Masai Mara Reserve. Rachel opened it carefully, and a single photograph slid into her hand. It was the leopard. Captured by one of the reserve's camera traps, she stood tall in the golden grass, her coat glossy, her eyes bright, and, just behind her, two nearly grown cubs, healthy and strong. On the back of the photo was a handwritten note from Joseph. She came back to the old clearing. She's thriving, so are they. Rachel stared at the image until her vision blurred, the weight of the journey, hers and the leopard's, pressing in on her chest. She placed the photo on the mantel above the fireplace, where the morning light would always touch it first. From that day on, whenever visitors asked about the picture, Rachel would simply smile and say, "That's a story you have to feel to believe." And every time she said it, she could almost see amber eyes glinting in the shadows, somewhere far away, watching. In the weeks that followed, Rachel found herself glancing at the photo every morning as if it were a ritual. Some days she felt a quiet pride, other days a longing for that vast savanna air and the electric silence of the moment she first saw the leopard outside their lodge. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a tether, an invisible thread pulling her thoughts back across oceans and continents to a patch of wild grass where something extraordinary had happened. One chilly autumn evening, Max wandered into the living room, his homework forgotten in his hand. He pointed to the photograph. "Mom," he asked, "do you think she'll ever come here?" Rachel smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. She belongs there. That's her home." "But," Max pressed, "if she remembered you enough to come all the way back to that clearing, maybe she remembers us." Rachel didn't answer right away. She just looked at the image, the proud stance, the healthy cubs, and felt the truth in his words. "Maybe," she said softly, "and maybe that's enough." That night before bed, she stepped out onto the porch, the cold Colorado wind biting at her skin. Somewhere in the rustle of the trees, she imagined the faintest echo of a low, rolling rumble. So real, she found herself smiling into the dark. She stayed there longer than she meant to, the night stretching around her in quiet layers of sound. The wind through the aspens, the creak of the old porch boards, the distant call of a night bird. In her mind, she could still see the leopard slipping into the silver-lit grasslands, cubs at her side, each step carrying them deeper into freedom. It had been months, yet the memory felt as sharp as the night it happened. Behind her, the door creaked open and David stepped out, a mug of tea in his hands. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Rachel shook her head. "Just thinking about her." He leaned on the railing beside her. "She's probably out there right now, hunting, teaching her cubs, doing what she's meant to do." Rachel smiled faintly, and hopefully never needing to come to people for help again. David glanced at her, a knowing look in his eyes. But if she did, she'd know exactly where to find you. The idea settled in her chest, a strange mix of comfort and ache. She didn't know if their paths would ever cross again, but she realized it didn't matter. What mattered was that, for one brief moment in the endless churn of the wild, they had shared a thread of the same story. And maybe that was why she kept listening to the wind at night, half hoping to hear that soft, rolling rumble again. The next morning, frost clung to the grass outside their cabin, the mountains painted in early sunlight. Rachel poured her coffee and, without thinking, her eyes drifted to the photograph on the mantel. Something about it felt different today. The way the leopard's head was turned, the tilt of her ears. It almost looked as if she were listening to something just beyond the frame. Max came into the room still sleepy and stopped in front of the picture. "She looks like she's looking at you," he said, rubbing his eyes. Rachel chuckled softly. "Maybe she is." Later that day, while out on their usual weekend hike, the three of them paused at a ridge overlooking a sweep of pine forest. The wind was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment and let the air fill her lungs. And then she heard it. Not the wind, not the rustle of branches, a low, deep vibration. So faint she wondered if it was only in her mind. But it was there, the exact tone she remembered from that night in Africa when the leopard had stood just a few feet away. She opened her eyes and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. No golden coat between the shadows, no amber eyes in the dark. Still, she smiled, because whether it was real or just memory, it reminded her of a truth she'd learned in that clearing. Some connections don't fade with distance, and some goodbyes are never really the end. That night, long after Max had gone to bed and David was asleep, Rachel found herself sitting in the living room with only the fireplace for light. The photograph of the leopard was still in its place, the flames casting a warm flicker over the image. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and studied the details again. The way the leopard's muscles curved under her coat, the alert strength in her stance, the faint shadows of the cubs behind her. Every line of the image told a story she could feel as much as see. For months, she had thought of that encounter as a singular event, something that had happened and ended on that night in the reserve. But sitting there now, she realized it wasn't over. The experience had shaped her in ways she hadn't noticed at first. The way she listened more closely to the world around her, the patience she had learned in moments of uncertainty, the way she noticed subtleties in others' eyes that she once might have missed. The leopard had changed her, and somewhere, thousands of miles away, Rachel liked to think that she had changed the leopard too. Not just by saving her life, but by showing her that trust, even between species, was still possible in a world that didn't always give second chances. A log shifted in the fire, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Rachel smiled faintly, took a deep breath, and whispered so quietly it was almost lost in the crackle of the flames. "Stay wild!" The words lingered in the air for a moment, absorbed by the quiet of the house. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, carrying with it a low, distant moan that almost mimicked the sound of the leopard's rumble. Rachel leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed, letting the warmth of the fire and the memory of the savannah wash over her. She thought about the cubs, how old they must be now, how they'd be learning to stalk through tall grass, how their mother would be teaching them to blend with the shadows. In her mind, she could see them, three golden shapes moving in perfect silence through a sea of dry grass, the mother glancing over her shoulder every now and then to check they were close. And she imagined that sometimes the mother might pause just a second longer, looking toward a horizon she could never cross, towards someone she could never meet again, but hadn't forgotten. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. Rachel rose, placed another log on the fire, and glanced once more at the photograph. She traced her finger lightly over the image, over those sharp amber eyes. Somewhere out there, the leopard was alive, thriving, carrying on in the endless rhythm of the wild. And even though Rachel's world was far away, in some strange and wordless way, their paths still felt connected. as if that night had braided an invisible thread between them that neither time nor distance could sever. She didn't need to see the leopard again to know it was real. She could feel it. The days grew shorter as winter settled over Colorado, yet Rachel's mind kept drifting back to the warmth of that African night. Sometimes, while walking to the mailbox or driving along an empty stretch of road, she would catch herself glancing toward tree lines or open fields, her heart skipping for a beat as if she might see a familiar golden shape there. One afternoon, while sorting through the mail, a heavy envelope slid out from between bills and flyers. The return address was unfamiliar, but when she opened it, a folded letter and several photographs spilled onto the counter. They were from Joseph. His handwriting carried the same measured steadiness as his voice. "I thought you'd want to know. She's been seen again, stronger than ever. The cubs are nearly grown, hunting on their own. We believe she's teaching them the boundaries of her range." Rachel's breath caught as she flipped through the photographs. In one, the leopard stood poised on a rocky outcrop, her muscles taut with power. In another, two nearly grown cubs followed close behind her, eyes bright, coats thick and healthy. The last image made Rachel pause, the mother looking straight into the camera, head slightly tilted, her expression calm, knowing. Rachel traced the outline of the leopard's face with her fingertip. It wasn't just a wild animal she saw anymore. It was a story, a bond, a shared moment in time that neither of them could ever recreate, yet would always carry. She pinned the new photographs beside the old one on the mantle, stepping back to take them in. It felt like a continuation, not an ending. And deep down, she knew their story wasn't finished yet. That night, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Rachel sat on the couch with the photographs spread out on the coffee table. Max joined her, his small hands carefully picking up each image, studying the details. "She looks happy," he said finally, pointing to the one where the leopard stood with her cubs against a backdrop of tall golden grass. Rachel smiled softly. "She does." Max leaned closer, lowering his voice as though the leopard could somehow hear him through the photograph. "Do you think she remembers us?" Rachel looked at him, and for a moment she considered giving the logical answer. That wild animals don't think about people the way people think about them. But she stopped herself. "I think," she said slowly, "that sometimes you meet someone, or something, and it leaves a mark you can't forget. Maybe it's the same for her." Max's eyes widened slightly. He nodded, satisfied with the thought, and set the picture back down. Long after he'd gone to bed, Rachel remained in the quiet room, the photographs illuminated by the firelight. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines, a sound that made her think of the night in the clearing, the moon on the leopard's coat, and the unspoken understanding between them. She didn't know if she would ever stand face to face with the leopard again, but in her heart, she felt certain of one thing. The bond between them had crossed the distance, and in some unexplainable way, it was still alive. Days turned into weeks, but the photographs never lost their pull. Rachel found herself pausing by the mantel on her way to make coffee, glancing at the leopard's steady gaze as though expecting it to change somehow. One early morning, before the rest of the house was awake, she stepped outside with a blanket draped around her shoulders. The ground was covered in frost, each blade of grass sparkling in the pale light. She took a deep breath. The cold air sharpened her lungs and closed her eyes. In that stillness, she imagined the leopard moving through the savanna. The soft pad of her paws on dry earth, the sway of her tail, the rustle of tall grass brushing against her sides. She pictured the cubs, now stronger, matching their mother's pace as they followed her toward a distant waterhole. The vision felt so vivid that when she opened her eyes, she almost expected to see them at the edge of the forest. Of course, there was nothing there, only the quiet Colorado morning and the faint warmth of the rising sun. But the feeling lingered, a connection that time and miles couldn't touch. Rachel pulled the blanket tighter and whispered into the cold, the words catching in the air before fading away. "Be safe." And though the wind carried her voice into the trees, she liked to believe it would travel farther still, across continents, over open plains, to a golden coat and amber eyes that might, in some small way, remember. She lingered there on the porch, watching the breath curl from her lips in soft clouds. Somewhere inside the house, the old clock chimed, but she didn't move. The moment felt suspended, like the stillness before a storm or the pause between heartbeats. When she finally stepped back inside, the warmth of the fire wrapped around her, and her eyes immediately found the mantle. The photograph seemed almost to glow in the flickering light, the leopard's gaze catching hers in a way that felt deliberate. That evening, Rachel sat with her journal open, something she hadn't done in years. She wrote about the clearing, about the first time she saw the leopard sitting in front of the lodge, about the way its eyes had locked onto hers, not in threat, but in trust. She wrote about the cubs, about the relief she'd felt when they emerged from the shadows, and about the way the mother had looked back one last time before disappearing into the grass. By the time she set her pen down, the fire had burned low. She closed the journal slowly, feeling the weight of those words settle into her chest like something permanent. It struck her then, this wasn't just her story anymore. It was theirs, a story that belonged to the wild as much as it belonged to her, one that would keep unfolding whether she was there to see it or not, and somehow, that felt right. She glanced once more at the photographs, a faint smile touching her lips. Some bonds didn't fade, they only changed shape. Months later, Rachel received another letter from Joseph. Inside was a single photograph, the leopard again, but this time alone, standing on a sunlit ridge. Her coat gleamed, her muscles coiled with strength, her head held high against the wind. On the back of the photo were just 3 words, "She's still free." Rachel held the image for a long time, her thumb brushing the edges. Outside, snow was falling softly, blanketing the quiet Colorado hills. She looked toward the window, imagining the vast African plains stretching endlessly under the sun, somewhere far beyond her sight. And she smiled, because she knew the truth. The bond they'd shared was not bound by place or time. It was alive in the wild, carried in amber eyes and silent acknowledgments. And somewhere, under a sky full of stars, a leopard roamed with her cubs, strong and untamed, and perhaps in some way, remembering the human who had once answered her silent cry for help. If this story touched your heart, share it.